Hello, yes, a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening to you, however you may be listening and wherever you may be listening. This is the latest edition of the Baldwin Sports Media NFL podcast. Now, I should start off this episode by apologising for not giving you an episode last week. We do aim to do this on a weekly basis. However, for some level of disclosure, this is not my full-time job as much as I would like it to be. But I do have a part-time job just in retail whilst I help pay the bills around here, and there was something of an emergency at work that they needed me to fill in, and basically I just did not have any time to record a show last week. But everything's good, everything's fine, just 1 week hiccup, but in the grand scheme of things I didn't really miss too much. I mean, as Mike Florio, I happened to notice this when I was scrolling Twitter this morning. Mike Florio, he posted a story where he was giving his thoughts on Miami Dolphins wide receiver Tyreek Hill and his contract situation and how the team can or maybe should start to move the money around in order to make it cap friendly. And someone replied to that story on Twitter saying, "Slow news day, huh?" To which Florio then responded with, "Actually, yes it is. Have you checked the calendar?" So even those within the NFL news landscape know that there's not, there are events going on, but there's not really a lot of big news coming out. We've seen Darryl Waller, the tight end, saying he's going to be stepping down. Steven Nelson, the cornerback previously of the Texans, he's going to be retiring. So there is some news, but nothing quite majorly or NFL landscape changing has been happening in the past couple of days, with teams now starting mini camps and mandatory mini camps, as it were. There is going to be the potential for things to happen. As I've been saying, perhaps someone pulls a hamstring, and not that we ever want that, but someone picks up an injury, and now that ruins their off season or maybe their regular season, as it were. So you always got to keep an eye out and keep your ears open for podcasts like this to help keep you updated. And with that, I'd like to say, as I always do at the start of every show, I'd like to thank you for tuning in and making me a part of your week. If you are new, don't forget you can like and subscribe on whatever platform you are listening to this to. And if you are a returning listener, then as always, thank you very much for your continued support in this endeavour. And don't forget you can follow me on various social media outlets as well. YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram are all at Baldwin Sports Media on whatever platform you choose to go there. And on Twitter, we are at MRB Sports Media. And with that out of the way, it is time to get on with the show. And I think it's only fitting that we start with number one topic of this show, with the team that drafted number one in this year's draft, and that is the Chicago Bears. Now, there were a couple of bits of news coming out of the Chicago Bears this past week. One being that they are looking to re-sign tight end Mercedes Lewis, who is 40 years old, and I did have some thoughts on that. There was also a video that went viral of Keenan Allen, their new wide receiver, catching a pass from Caleb Williams, and at least according to the clip, and I think we should stress this was only one clip, he seemed to be a little bit disappointed that basically Keenan Allen was going up the left-hand side of the field. Caleb Williams threw him a ball, and it was a little bit airy. Let's just put it that way. It wasn't like a dart. It wasn't a bullet pass for him to run onto. It was a little airy, and Keenan Allen rather had to slow down to catch it, and he seemed a little bit annoyed with that. And some people took that to mean rather that Keenan Allen isn't going to be getting good service in Chicago. No, he's going to be missing. He's going to be missing Justin Herbert, say, this year, which you can make a fair argument, and that's because I think we need to have a discussion about Caleb Williams and what we can expect from him this upcoming season. Because Caleb Williams has been noted as the number one pick in the draft for a couple of years now. Ever since he first burst onto the scene in college, everyone knew that whenever he came out, he was going to be the number one pick in the draft. And there was some speculation that maybe he wouldn't come out this year, depending on who the team was that was going to be drafting him. He did have an extra year of eligibility. There was even Mike Florio, again, a Pro Football Talk, suggesting that Caleb Williams, if it were going to be the Bears who have a history of not producing and not having any good quarterbacks, pretty much in the vast majority of people's lifetimes, that he could say, no, I don't trust this franchise. I'm gonna skip on it and re-enter the draft, or work his way out, pull an Eli Manning or John Elway to sort of get away from the Chicago Bears. There was always that speculation, but either way, when he came out, he was the number one. He was always going to be the number one pick in the draft. And a lot of people are saying that he is the saviour of the Bears, despite what I just said about how they haven't been able to produce any decent quarterback play. He does feel, and it does at least look somewhat special, especially when you consider the weapons that the Bears have put around him, for this season. That was always the complaint that people had about Justin Fields of, he's not getting any weapons and that's why he was failed. You didn't do enough around it. But the Chicago Bears have, again, on paper, put together a pretty decent roster. You look at the running backs, DeAndre Swift was a pretty big signing for them this offseason at wide receiver. We mentioned Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, who came over in the trade with the Carolina Panthers a couple of years ago that got the Panthers the number one pick in order to get Bryce Young. I do think that he's going to be a very successful player with Caleb Williams. Rome Odunze as well, a pretty promising wide receiver that they picked up in this year's draft. Cole Kmet, I think, is a very solid tight end. He's not in the Travis Kelce realm, but I do think that Cole Kmet is a solid player to have. There is Mercedes Lewis, so I brought in a good safe veteran to have as an option. So they do have the options. However, I do want to say that I do think there should be, at least in his first season, there should be a level of expectation and everyone should just cool their jets when it comes to him. And I want to use two examples to sort of back this up. And I was thinking about this. Who have been the quarterbacks that in the past couple of years we've always, it's been announced or it's been worked out before the start of the season, this person is going number one, because they had the eligibility through college, they shined at a young age, and everyone knew what was going on. And the only names that really struck to mind, again, straight away from my mind, again, I can't go back to like John Elway's days. Was he, when he was coming out of Stanford, was he seen as the great next thing? No, during his freshman year, for instance, and all that sort of stuff. But the two that stick to mind, at least in my conscious lifetime, were Andrew Luck and Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence, had a great first year at Clemson. Everyone said, there was some who said that he could play in the NFL basically at 18, 19 years old. He was that good. And the other one being Andrew Luck, who, again, everyone sort of knew this guy's going number one, whatever team is drafting. And that was the same with Caleb Williams. And I just wanted to go back and look at those players that have been touted as the next great thing. What were their stats in their first year? I'm not going to start projecting about what Caleb Williams can do long term, because again, I do think he is a good player and a great option for the Bears. But this first season, I think, is crucial. And I want to go look at the stats of what Trevor Lawrence and Andrew Luck did during their rookie years. Again, just so we can sort of say, and we're not starting to call him a bust right away. I think that is something we need to start doing with regards to Caleb Williams. So Trevor Lawrence, again, on a bad Jacksonville Jaguars team, historically have been very bad, again, for most of my lifetime. They had their stretch in the 90s and early to mid 2000s. Then they were bad. Then they had that 1 year with Saxonville and that great defense. But for the most part have been bad. So that needs to be tempered. So a record of 3-14. I'm not going to look at the record. But he completed 59.6% of his passes through for 3,641 yards, which is okay, but considering what we expect quarterbacks to really be doing in this day and age, not exactly monumental numbers. And then he started off with 12 touchdowns and 17 interceptions. So that was Trevor Lawrence, again, anointed as the next great thing early on, struggled in his first year in the NFL. And then if we look at Andrew Luck, again, a similar one. Now, on a better Colts team, obviously we're coming off the Peyton Manning injury that sort of got them the number one pick. But again, 4,374 yards, completed 54.1% of his passes. Again, not the most accurate, good but not the most accurate. 23 touchdowns and 18 interceptions. So again, good but not great, and certainly when you want someone to be the saviour of the franchise, and whilst Trevor Lawrence is and Andrew Luck was, injuries aside, he was the guy to take over from Peyton Manning, there is always just that level of they are going to go through some growing pains in this. Now, we have seen number one quarterbacks come through and or early round quarterbacks come through and struggle. Look at Bryce Young. But at the same time, CJ Stroud in the same draft. But I think there is a mental side of this to those players who have been anointed as the great ones from such a young age. Again, it's not, if you were to come into the number one pick in a draft where it's sort of umming and ahhing about who's going to go number one. I look at Baker Mayfield in 2018. There was talk about, Josh Allen could go number one, Sam Darnold could go number one. That was Lamar Jackson's draft. That was Josh Rosen's draft, who a lot of people were high on, but obviously that sort of failed away. But that was always something. But coming in from and having that pressure on you from that early an age, I think does sort of take that toll on you in that first year where you're thinking, right, I have to hit the ground right away. I have to be the guy straight away because a lot of people are expecting this of me. So I think that is something we need to start doing with Caleb Williams is let's not say that he's going to do a CJ Stroud with the Houston Texans and take them to the playoffs right away or have that great instant impact that other quarterbacks have. There is always that risk. And I know, again, it seems obvious, but there is always that risk that he is not going to be the savior that we want right away. And I think that's what we need to start thinking of, is this isn't a one-year solution for the Bears. This guy is going to be here for the long run. And I do think he can survive in the NFL in the long run, even though he's, a small-ish quarterback by most people's standard, and he is a runner, and, if you go, is someone of that size and stature going to survive in a windy city and a winter city like Chicago? We've seen the struggles that, like, for instance, Tua Tagovailoa has when he goes to cold weather cities for big games. Is that going to affect someone? I do think he will go into it, and I think he will overcome it. But just in this first season, I think people do need to just taper their expectations just that little bit on what he is going to be able to produce. And, let's not write him off let's not write him off too quickly. And on the subject of number one quarterbacks, we move on to our next subject, and that is the news that Joe Burrow is seemingly going to be the next cover athlete for the Madden NFL series. Now, I say this as I am recording on a Monday, and the news has not been officially announced yet. By the time you're listening to this, it might be officially announced, but I'm going off the details that we have at the moment, and this has sort of come from leaked news, and there has been social media posts, and people have started to work out and sort of gather that it is going to be Joe Burrow as the cover athlete. Again, nothing confirmed yet, so if this doesn't come through, then I'm sort of giving myself enough plausible deniability to say I didn't confirm it or anything, but it seems to be going that way. Now, I don't really pay too much attention to Madden cover athletes. I think it's not really that big a deal. I don't see, I can see it being a prestigious honor, but at the same time, it doesn't really change. It doesn't really change that much. Like, I doubt there are going to be, for this instance, Joe Burrow, a Bengal. I doubt there are going to be any Steelers or Ravens or Browns fans that say, I'm not going to buy the game this year because Joe Burrow is the athlete. And at the same time, I don't think there are going to be any more people that buy the game that say, Joe Burrow is the cover athlete, now I'm going to buy it. So I don't think it's all that important. I do understand the importance of the curse, though. For those of you who don't know, there is something of a running joke that if you are put on the Madden cover, then you are going to be liable to a curse, as it were. After being on the cover, you could sustain an injury, or your performance isn't going to be as good as it was the last season. So I can understand, maybe not wanting to be on the cover, but at the same time, I do think the NFL has missed something of a trick here. I doubt it's the NFL that make the decision. I'm sure the EA probably has a bigger sway in this whole thing, and maybe the NFLPA, wondering who to put on. But I do think, as much as I said, I don't think anyone buys a game cover or buys a game based on who is on the cover. I do think that whoever was in charge missed a trick by not putting Travis Kelce on it. And that is for the obvious reason. Because does Joe Burrow have that sort of star power? No. Or at least have that star power in the non-footballing world? No. But if we are going to go down this line that the Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce relationship has helped grow the NFL's brand amongst the female audience, and particularly the young female audience, if we are going to go down that line that it has had an impact, which all the studies and all the reports say that it has, would you not want to put Travis Kelce on the cover just to give your sales just that little extra boost in sales, just so if there are those young girls who have been infatuated and captured by the NFL because of the relationship, this is going to be the next move for them. They can watch the game, now they can play the game. And for those of you who have played sports video games, it can sort of help you decipher the rules and help you be a little bit more knowledgeable about it. I'll use myself as the example. When I started getting into the sport of ice hockey, when I was watching the Guildford Flames, a ice hockey team back in the UK, one of the first things I did was I bought an NHL video game so I could start to understand what the rules are, how to and understand what was going on in the game. Like, it was through that I found out what icing was, or offside, or how that works, or how you can be called for certain penalties. Like, video games do help people understand the sport a lot better. And if that is the way that the EA and the NFL want to go down, then why not go and put Travis Kelce on the cover and tap into that market even further? We've seen what it's done so far. Let's kick it up a notch, as it were. So yeah, Joe Burrow set to be the cover athlete, but I do think that Travis Kelce, on a monetary side and a business side of it for EA, I think they missed a trick there. And on to the final NFL topic of this week, and I want to bring your attention to some comments that Green Bay Packers quarterback Jordan Love made on the team's official website this week, and he's talking about the team's wide receiver situation. Now, Jordan Love obviously had a very good first full season as the Green Bay Packers quarterback. Obviously, there would have been a lot of pressure and a lot of nerves coming in and a lot of expectation coming in from Aaron Rodgers and all the stuff that went on around his being drafted. But he did a very, very good job. Took them to the playoffs and won a playoff game. So good for Jordan Love and what they did. But he's talking about the makeup of the wide receiver room, because at the moment it looks as if they are going to be going with a group that consists of Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, and Dontavian Wicks as their main wide receiver options. Now, that list doesn't contain what you might conceive to be a number one wide receiver. And Jordan Love has expressed that. Again, talking to the team's website, he said, I think you don't have to have a number one wide receiver. I think it works out well when you can spread the ball out and you've got different guys making different plays and you can put them in different areas. I think it puts a lot more stress on the defense and the calls that they can get in. So I think in the long run, it helps us not having a number one guy, a true number one guy. But I think all these guys can step up and be that one any given day. And I'm not too sure if I agree with Jordan Love on this, because when was the last time you saw a Super Bowl team, or at least a Super Bowl contending team, those that we like to think of, that didn't have that number one A+ wide receiver? You look at the Kansas City Chiefs last year, and whilst the wide receiver core was not good, at the end, Rashee Rice became that number one guy. You look at Joe Burrow, he has Jamar Chase. You look at Josh Allen, the Buffalo Bills, they have Stephon Diggs. You look at the San Francisco 49ers, whilst they have a lot of great weapons, Deebo Samuel is their number one wide receiver. You look at Tua Tagovailoa, Tyreek Hill is the number one wide receiver there. If you want to go back historically, Tom Brady had Julian Edelman and Wes Welker. Ben Roethlisberger had Antonio Brown. Peyton Manning had Marvin Harrison. The senior one, by the way, not the junior one. I did have to pause myself there a little bit. But all these players have always had that number one. Someone that you can go to and rely upon in that emergency situation. Someone to put the team on their back, as it were. And I think it's okay to have these sort of levels of expectations for your wide receiver core, but and try not to big them up or maybe give them too big of egos, because we know what wide receivers can be. They can be a little bit diva-ish. So in order to keep them in check, I think that's a pretty good way to go about it. But again, if they want to be a Super Bowl contender, which I don't think is reasonably out of the lines of possibility for the Green Bay Packers this year, especially given the jump start that Jordan Love gave them when he came in. But they do need to have that number one established, because whilst he talks about spreading the ball around the field, it does help to have that number one guy for the defense to hone in on, and then you can start to take the pressure away and move it away to someone else. The best example I can give, look at what Juju Smith-Schuster was able to do with the Pittsburgh Steelers when Antonio Brown was that number one and he was put in double and triple coverage. That opens up the room for someone else. Again, would, for the sake of argument, would T. Higgins or Tyler Bate have had the success that they've had with the Cincinnati Bengals if Jamar Chase wasn't that number one go-to guy for Joe Burrow? Now, as he said, he wants one of them to become that established number one, and if I were to pick a name that they're looking at, I think that will be Christian Watson at some point down the line. I do think I don't think he'll ever be the number one wide receiver in the league, but I think top 5, top 10, I don't think that's too far out of his reach if he carries on the way that he's been doing. But unless, you can work it with, a group of 4 and have that, who's he really going to throw to? But I think that only really works if you have multiple A+, A options. That's why I think the San Francisco 49ers, who I mentioned earlier, it can work because you have an A+ running back / wide receiver, given his skill set, in Christian McCaffrey. You have an A+ wide receiver in Deebo Samuel. You have probably A-, B+ in Brandon Ayuk. You have an A+ in George Kittle. You have all those options to work with, so that's fair to spread around. But for the rest of the teams that have that, to have just that number one guy, that's the only way you can really get away with it. I don't think you can be okay with not having an established number one if they are, again, this is not being disrespectful. I think they're all very good wide receivers, but sort of you can't have 4 B+, A- wide receivers and then expect that to work out the way that Jordan Love has expressed. So again, I hope they do well. I do think there is a lot of success in that wide receiver room to come, but right now I don't think this is really the right attitude for Jordan Love to be taking. And your final story of this podcast, and one that I always like to do away from the gridiron, and I want to talk about this. I don't know how to pronounce this, but there's only really one way to do it, and that's the Savannah Bananas. I know it's probably Savannah, Bananas. I don't want to get into the pronunciation of it, but there's only really one way to say it, and that's the fun way. That's the Savannah Bananas, because they are a fun team. If you are not aware, the Bananas are a baseball team who basically want to bring fun back to baseball. Baseball has had a bit of a bad rap in the past couple of years about how it's too slow and it's too old and it's too rigid and it's not. It's a bit of a dying breed. MLB have done a good job in trying to make things better with things like the pitch clock to speed the games up, so it doesn't get dragged out the way it used to in the past. But the Savannah Bananas have taken that to a whole nother level with their game. And I saw a clip this weekend that the fact that they were able to sell out Fenway Park shows you that, that you probably have seen clips of them. You may not have been aware of it, but you probably have seen clips of them come across your social media of, days when they had, someone came up to bat with their bat on fire, or someone did an elaborate celebration or a dance that they occasionally do during games. Again, they just bring fun to baseball. I'm not being paid to say this, is just something that really caught my eye. I've been paying attention ever since I stumbled across one of those viral clips. But the fact that they are now on their Banana World Tour and are selling out big league stadiums like this, I urge you, if you are someone who has maybe been a bit skeptical about baseball in the past, or is starting to wane, or even if you're not really into the sport, the Savannah Bananas are a great gateway into the sport, because they do make baseball fun. They don't play by the traditional rules. It's not necessarily run score. They have a system where it's points. If there's a foul ball, when the ball goes into the stands, if it's caught by a fan, that counts as an out, so it gets the fans participating. It's a really, really fun night out. Again, I haven't been. I do want to go. They are playing in Cleveland, which isn't too far from me, in a couple of weeks' time. I do want to go see it. If I can, I will. But I imagine they're probably sold out as well. But either way, just look up the Savannah Bananas. I urge you to say, it's a great way to get into baseball. And even if you don't really like baseball, and if they don't convince you to watch the proper, in quotation marks, the proper sport, as it were, just watch them. Just watch the clips for fun, because they are such an entertaining team. They are the Harlem Globetrotters of baseball, and Harlem Globetrotters, I'm sure, acted as a gateway for many people to get into actual basketball. This is a great way to get into actual baseball, and I just urge you to go and look at it and just see some of the stuff that they are doing. It is absolutely incredible in bringing the fun back to baseball. And with that, we bring this latest edition of the podcast to an end. As I always say, thank you very much for listening and making me a part of your week. As I said at the top of the show, if you are new, don't forget you can like and subscribe on whatever platform you are listening to, and don't forget to reach out on social media, which is again on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram is at Baldwin Sports Media, and on Twitter is MRB Sports Media. Thank you once again for listening. I'll hopefully be back next week with more NFL news. Hopefully some news does come out, and it's not the slow news day that Mike Flory talked about. But until next time, you guys all take care. See you later.